So here we have maneuvered ourselves over to the mold making station, and I want you to notice that I've put my mask back on because I want to show you how I think the like mask swap is going to work. So I'm going to do that just as a sort of like the first demo. So I'm going to pop my N95 over my mask. I'm not going to squeeze it down, and then I'm just going to carefully remove my paper mask or my cloth mask from inside. Put it somewhere clean, maybe back in my mask baggie, and then fit this to my face by squeezing and doing kind of like a, and if you feel with a hard out breath, it sort of like puffs out a little bit but doesn't move away from your face, that's the right method. And maybe with that big puff out breath, just turn away from the center of the room so you're not puff out breathing into the center of the room. All right, so when we are in mold making mode, anyone who is mixing plaster silica over here should announce that they're mixing plaster silica so everyone can have their mask at hand. Whomever is working at table number 1 will definitely want to put their mask on, and then tables 2 and 3 behind the camera have an option about whether, I think that the airflow in here is probably fine, but you can choose. I'm just going to pop this down so we can talk for a little bit, and then I'll pop it back up when we actually start the grabbing of material. So notice over here that I've pulled out 3 sets of buckets. You don't need 3 sets of buckets, but because I want to do this demo in sort of fast order, we're going to measure out all of our plaster silica at the beginning of our mold, and then we're just going to mix it as we need it. When you're working in here during your in-class work time and you are by yourself or with just one other person, I guess it'll always be just one other person, you're welcome to sort of pre-set things up, but in class we'll sort of just have to feel for the cadence of the class. The things that you're going to want to grab when you're ready to mix your molds are a scale. I prefer the analog scale because I find it really easy to read. A bucket or a pitcher full of water. You don't have to have that over here, but it makes things move a little faster than having to walk back and forth to the sink. And then mixing buckets. Hold on. When we mix plaster silica, we do, this is important. So I'm gonna say this, and then maybe Madeline can put it on the screen. Our plaster silica water recipe is 1 to 1 to 1 by weight. So what that means is that we use 1 part plaster plus 1 part silica plus 1 part water. So another way to say that is if I know that I need a pound of plaster, that also means that I need a pound of silica and a pound of water. And we measure out each one and then combine them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Great. I mean, I'm asking Madeline, but she already knows this, so like that's something that I would say to class. So that's really important to know. The other things that I want you to know about this station are that you never mix plaster silica without the updraft on, so I'll turn that on in a second. And then I just wanted to tell you a couple of safety things about this material. The plaster that we use is a number 1 pottery plaster, so a fine white pottery plaster. On its own, it is very strong once it goes through its chemical change at room temperature. It is also an irritant when you breathe it in, but it's not deadly. So you want a mask, but if you happen to sort of puff a bit, it could irritate your lungs, and we definitely don't want that, but you are not going to get sick or die. Silica is a 220 size sand. They look almost identical. The silica is made of silica powder, so it's like a glass body sand sort of. I can get more into the material of that if you're interested. And it is
very strong when mixed with plaster at high temperatures. So they are really perfect bedfellows for making molds for glass casting, as the plaster does the hard work of being strong at room temperature, and then the silica takes over the needed strength during its hottest part of the firing. The other good thing about these materials is that they are built to be strong when they need to be strong, and then after they've reached top temp and stayed in the kiln for a while, they break down. And so they're very easy to pull off of your glass and clean your glass. That is called divesting, and we'll talk about that later. The silica is worse for you to breathe in. Pre-fire, it's not great, but it won't kill you. But we will always wear a mask when there's silica out. And when the silica has been fired, once it comes out of the kiln, it is very bad for your lungs. So we take extra precaution when we are divesting our molds. And we'll talk more about those safety measures when we're at that part of the demo process. So just know that anytime you're working with this material over here, definitely a mask. In proximity, definitely a mask. A little further away, it's going to be for your comfort and sort of mental health, but you can make a decision. One more thing. The mixing station is always nice to work in when it's been cleaned, but this table will get messy. And I suggest that you kind of just let it get messy throughout the process and then do a big clean after, because once you start making your mold, it'll feel much better if you continue on as sort of a synchronous ongoing activity. So when you're prepping your station, grab some water, grab a scale, grab the buckets that you need, and then you're going to use a little Vaseline to lube up what will be the wet bucket. So that will be one of each of your mixing buckets. I'm just gonna get like a little pea-sized amount of Vaseline. Again, you can put gloves on and rub it on with your gloves. You can use the chip brush. So I'm gonna choose the kind of the cleanest buckets that I've pulled out to rub with Vaseline. The amount of Vaseline that we use as release in the buckets doesn't do anything to the plaster silica, but what it does is makes cleanup so much easier. And because we want these buckets to last as long as we can, if we add a little bit of lubricant, a little bit of mold release, then it really sort of prolongs their life because they don't get super dirty. And I'm just adding a little extra time into the corner of the bottom and into this little lip of the bucket. So that's one. This one will get some too. It's also going to add a little protection on my skin. Plaster silica, when you mix it, is very drying. If you've ever worked with ceramic, you understand what your skin feels like after a day of sort of being submerged in clay or plaster. So that's no different in here. I have particularly sensitive skin, so I like to put a little barrier of cream or Vaseline on my skin before, which then sort of prevents the super drying elements to break down, or to sort of break down my skin's barriers. Again, similar to lubing up the coddles or the table, I'm just adding enough where it's coated, but I cannot like pull any up with my finger. That will definitely mess with your plaster silica mix. So default to sort of more touching and less material. And then the last one. That's the last time we'll use Vaseline today. Maybe, just kidding, definitely.
Never knew to do that. It's Vaseline the bucket.
Yeah, it's a really good trick. You can also use butcher's wax, which is like a wax that's been impregnated with turpentine and linseed oil. I don't use it during class because it has a very strong smell that I like, but other people don't. And this is just a little bit easier, and everyone can have their own tube. Getting into the corners, getting all around, a little extra for my wrists and hands. Oh, my skin's gonna thank me afterwards. All right. So let's talk about amounts. This is a teeny tiny object. I don't need a huge amount of plaster silica for any of these layers. For the face coat, I will almost always default to 1/2 pound. It's very, very difficult to mix less than 1/2 pound of plaster silica. It gets sort of lumpy and it starts to cure quite quickly, and it's better, in my opinion, to waste a little plaster silica than to have a bad plaster silica slurry. So I will always, unless I'm making more than one mold at a time, or if I'm making a very large mold, a good rule of thumb for your face coat is 1/2 pound, 1/2 pound, 1/2 pound. Now for my second coat, for my first strength coat, I'm going to sort of look at my object and I'm going to say, I don't need very much plaster silica, so I'm going to do 1 pound, 1 pound, 1 pound. You don't know what this means yet, and that's okay. So you can watch what I'm doing and sort of get a sense of what the 1/2 pound looks like and what the extra is versus what the 1 pound looks like, etc. And you'll begin to develop your own your own sense of understanding. If you're feeling very, very specific, you can find a container that fits over your object, and then you can calculate the volume of the container, and then you can estimate the volume of your object and subtract them, and then you can figure out what that difference is and calculate the amount of liquid you need from there. It's real, unless you are that person, it's really not necessary, because it's okay to waste a little plaster silica, and if we need to mix up more, we can do that too. So we're going to do 1/2 pound for the face coat, 1 pound for the first strength coat for the second layer, and then we're going to do 1.5 pounds for the exterior coat. And the exterior coat gets a little bit more material, and I'll talk about that when we're there. So let's measure out each of our layers right now, and then we can mix them all up as we need them. So I'm going to create 3 little stations. This will be my face coat, can you see? This will be my second layer, and this will be my last coat, my jacket. So what I'm going to do is, the bucket that I Vaselined is going to be the bucket that I put the water in. So this is 1/2 pound. So what I want to make sure is that my my scale is zeroed out, and there's a little wheel right here that I can mess with just to get it to sit at 0. And then I'm going to pour my water in, and I just want to make a note that it's the red numbers that are pounds and the black numbers are kilos or kilograms. Don't mix them up, because that means that you're going to be, if you're looking for kilos, you're going to be using a lot more material. So all I need is a very small amount, just to 1/2 pound, which is very little. All right, and I'm just going to keep measuring out my waters, and then I can move on to my plaster silicas. If you're just doing one at a time, then you've measured out your water and you'll go straight to plaster silica. So we should be properly zeroed out still, because it's the same size bucket. And we said 1 pound for this, so now I'm going to look for the 1 pound notch and pour to that. This is a bigger bucket, so I have to zero it out again. Different size bucket, different zero. If you're using the digital scales, you'll just have to press that tare button, T-A-R-E, to zero it out. So here we're gonna do, I said 1.5, but let's do 2. And if we have too much, that's fine. And I'd rather sort of err on the safe side. So we'll do 2 pounds. Great. So now all of our water's done.
we're ready to start with the refractory material. So I'm going to pop my mask on, and I'm going to turn Madeline's going to turn the vent on. Woo-wee. All right, so let's swap these over.